a little bit of table setting, I guess. Can you walk us through terms like neurodivergent and like masking?
Partially, I can, right? So I'm new to understanding my neurodivergent diagnosis, and so I'm here speaking not as a professional, but as a participant in this
Sure.
neurological sphere. So anything that I say tonight should be taken with a grain of salt. I'm certainly not expert on anything, but my understanding is that neurodivergence is a label for the kinds of brains that have different neurological and cognitive functionings, and that includes the realms of ADHD, anyone that relates to being on the spectrum. I believe also Down's syndrome and a couple of other things, right? Um,
Yeah, a lot of people define it in different ways. Oftentimes, you will see it sort of end with sensory processing and dyslexia. Other people like to expand that term to include folks who have experienced trauma or any like physical change to their neurobiology.
mm,
It's a kind of a new idea. I can put it that way.
yeah. Yeah. And then in terms of masking, right? So again, very specifically, this one I can only speak on my own behalf. But masking is, for me, at least in the past, a subconscious, unconscious restriction of my behavior to commodify or to fit in with what I have internalized that society expects out of me in any given situation. Um, yeah, and some people experiencing masking profoundly throughout the day, throughout their life, and if you're living that kind of a life for a long period of time, you can experience a lot of peripheral comorbid, like other issues like depression and anxiety and that sort of thing. So masking can be just life stealing with, so that's what masking is. It's not intentional. I never knew I was masking.
Sure.
I had
Yeah.
no idea. In fact, I was coaching people who were neurodivergent and telling me that they were masking, and I was like, oh no, that sucks. Like, oh, you could be yourself around me. And then I find out, oh shit, I've been masking for like 30 years.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think about it like some boarding school where children are seen but not heard, and sometimes it's that explicitly enforced idea. But as often as not, it just sort of turns into, well, this is the way everybody else behaves. This is the way I behave,
Mm,
and kind of tamping yourself down until you really even forget that you're doing it or you're
yeah.
trying to like fit in and it just becomes automatic,
Yeah.
even though it can be terribly exhausting.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like when I was masking, it felt like I was mold, and that like whatever came into my space, I just kind of conformed myself to fit into it.
Hmm.
And now like that I'm becoming more aware of my neurodivergence and my all of the things that were related to that, I feel more like I'm a proactive self, like I'm pushing myself outwards and letting people know where my boundaries are, who I am, what I need, instead of conforming. And so it obviously intersects a lot with like codependency can show up a lot in folks who are struggling with this as well.
Yeah. Well, so I have been kind of following along your story online and just getting excited about some of the things you've been discovering about yourself. What can you share with us about what the last year or so has been like for you?
Oh my God, y'all, it's been a journey. It's been a journey. So and I'll say that it probably started with shrooms, but we'll just move on from there. But
Sure.
like, so that that was a kind of eye-opening experience. But I to make a long story short, I found out that I had ADHD last October. And so since then, I've been kind of going through just a lot of mental reorganization, a lot of coming to terms with who I am, what my life has been, a lot of childhood memories coming up that I had repressed, a lot of pulling things together. My life started to make sense. A lot of my experiences started to make sense. The reason why I was struggling with so many things started to make sense. And once they made sense, I started developing compassion and love for myself by understanding my narrative, by understanding why I was who I was, which I wasn't. That's because I wasn't me, because I didn't know how to be myself because I didn't understand myself. And so since October, I've been doing a lot of self work, a lot of self exploration, a lot of digging into what I call like secular sexuality, or excuse me, secular spirituality. I tried
Mm-hmm.
to honor the parts of me that were injured in Christianity, and to engage in a self knowledge that sometimes feels like what God used to feel like, but it's just me. And so I'm finding the ability to be happy, that I apparently have that ability once I, got to know myself better. But yeah, a lot of my experiences with masking before all of this, and still, because I'm still having to become aware of it and to confront it. Um, a lot of it shows up in a word I'll use is like paranoia.
Mm-hmm.
Like you know, I'm just going to be meta right now. I'm looking at myself on a screen right now. I'm looking at myself talking, and it brings up a kind of a paranoia, being hyper aware of how I look, of how I sound. And my brain is experiencing the vast amount of people, the vast thousands of people watching me and judging me and critiquing every little thing about me. And oddly enough, I imagine that they're critiquing the very things that I'm self-conscious about, like my semi-discolored front tooth, or like the fact that I have wrinkles, or that my hair is a little bit messy. So I experience masking in feeling that in a very loud level in my head, and then not saying it. So me saying it right now is my intentional choice to unmask and say that it's difficult to be in my mind with a lot of this paranoia. I'm hyper vigilant about how my body is positioned, how I'm sitting, how I'm standing. Is this thing sticking out? Is that thing sticking out? And it, depending on whether my brain says that I'm okay or not, I feel safe or not, and the rules in my brain are completely arbitrary. They just kind of make it up. And I don't know how these things got in there, but I realized it one day when I was in Target and I was standing in an aisle, and I felt like, am I in someone's way? And I kept looking all around and no one was there. But then I kept on seeing out of the corner of my eye, is someone coming down? So I was so hyper vigilant about getting out of somebody's way, and there was nobody there. And it's a small example, but it's a big example of what my life has been like in general. Like always, like I said, being that mold, getting out of everyone else's way, accommodating everyone else, and such an extreme extent that I'm in a constant state of hypervigilance, whether it's externally or whether it's internally. Hypervigilant with my thoughts, hypervigilant with how I talk to myself, hypervigilant about all these things. And so that's a lot of what my masking has felt like, and it shows up in relationships,
Mm-hmm.
in particular with my primary partner. I don't know if I like that word, but the domestic partner that I have, the one I'm
Sure.
most attached to, the most enmeshed with. I experience it the most masking there, which is surprising to me.
Yeah, no, it shows up in the most pervasive ways. And like in particular, the places where our default mode network is kicking in, where we're maybe like less intentional or active about what we're doing. I often think about it like the experience of trying to give up smoking or something along those lines. You think to yourself, oh, I want a cigarette. Nope, I shouldn't have a cigarette. Oh, I'm a little bit annoyed by that. Oh, wait, what was that guy saying? I'm supposed to be paying attention here. And
Hmm.
that like constant amount of mental work that is put into, well, don't stim if you are somebody on the autism spectrum who stims, or
Yeah.
some of these other ideas around, don't interrupt people. Like, how do I force myself to be the type of person I'm quote supposed to be in
Yeah.
our civilized society, when my brain is a little bit different from what's supposedly civilized.
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up the interruption part, because that's something I'm having a hard time with, because I'm dating someone who's neurodivergent as well, and they like to tell stories, and
Mm,
my some of my, I don't know, I don't want to label things. It's just I have a hard time interrupting people. And so it turns out then that I don't interrupt him, and then he keeps telling his story. And by the time he's finished telling his story, my poor mind is exhausted from trying to listen to the story, retain the story, have something interesting to say, try not to forget it, try not to forget it, try not to forget it, try not to forget it. And like, so like it's a whole exercise. It's exhausting. And so I've noticed that it's just incredibly difficult for me to interrupt him and be like, "Hey, dude, I'm like losing track of your story. Can we like hold on a second?" Or like anything, just saying anything like, "Hey, I'm not here anymore. I'm not paying attention
To just
anymore." Or
acknowledge what's going on, to be present and sincere
yeah,
in that sense. I mean,
yeah,
it's
because
really challenging because people feel insulted oftentimes, even though we're just looking to be sincere and even to increase the level of connection by letting them know what our experience is.
exactly. I don't want to infantilize him and patronize him by, uh-huh, uh-huh. Oh, okay. Good story. Good story. Uh-huh, uh-huh, uh-huh. Like it doesn't feel good in me, and that's not good for him. But it's hard. Yeah, it's just hard. As a specific example, it's hard to interrupt. And be like, I have something to say now too. Like,
Sure.
and especially if you have ADHD and you struggle with your working memory, and you're listening to a story that's this long, and you keep on having a thought right there, right there, right there that
Mhm.
you'd
It's
like to
hard to hold on to
share.
them.
Yeah, and you can't hold on to them. And every time a thought escapes my head that I want to share, I die a little inside because I have so many years of experience of a faulty or a different functioning working memory that
Mhm.
I've had to compensate for, that I've always felt uh, terrible and embarrassed about and apologetic for. There's a potential that in this next hour, I'm going to be in the middle of a sentence, and then we'll have to say, I don't know what we're talking about anymore. I don't know what I was talking about. Can you remind me? And that's fucking embarrassing,
Mm.
but it's a reality for me, and I'm not going to mask it anymore. I'm going to advocate for my brain, and I'm not going to apologize for what it does, and I'm not going to be embarrassed of it anymore. And so speaking up and saying like, "Oh, I just forgot what I was saying. Can you remind me?" Or learning, like for example, like sometimes I forget what I'm saying, and if I give myself 20 seconds of compassion and I just kind of wait, my brain brings it back up. Whereas in the past, I would just be like, if my brain forgot what I was saying, it would get really aggressive and like hostile, like, how could you forget what you're
And
saying
that's
again?
the
And like,
social pressure, and that's the
yeah,
challenge of being neurodiverse in a neurotypical world, and why we mask, why we try and make it work by looking like we're supposed to look, and
yeah,
following that script.
yeah. Yeah, like today I should have dressed up more, right? But I'm wearing, and I don't need anyone, to tell me that I look fine or anything. It's a thing inside of me, right? That says that, oh, I'm supposed to be looking this way. Christy has a suit jacket on. Why do you have a shirt that looks like a prisoner striped shirt from like the 50s? Like, and you haven't even showered today. What are you doing? And I was like, oh, so it's like, it's stuff like that, like that you feel self-conscious about, but I'm enough. I'm
Mm.
okay. Like my brain is enough as it is, and so I think that's one of the great things about leaning into. A lot of the people I talk to about neurodivergence in my coaching work are afraid to get diagnosed because they don't want to be labeled, and
Sure.
they don't want society to label them. And that's legitimate, and that's fair, and that is a real problem. That is a real bias issue. And I have experienced that the benefits of embracing, leaning into learning about these labels, even if you don't want to take the label on for yourself, at least explore the realm of what that means for people, can be so empowering, and you can get to know yourself better and lead a life that is better suited to your brain. And my life has changed incredibly since October, just incredibly. And I really just thought that my biggest life accomplishment would be dying at 80 saying, I tried really, really hard. Nobody can say I didn't try hard. That was my big goal. And now I already achieved it. Like I won't say I'm happy. I feel like I found what I was looking for, like,
Mm.
which was me.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to acknowledge diagnosis here because when we talk about really any form of neurodivergence, our diagnostic criteria are really messy. We're just frankly bad at diagnosing it as a medical establishment. That's without even talking about access to appropriate diagnostic tools, how expensive some of these tests can be, and all of those challenges. And then all of the heavy biases that
Mm.
are included. In particular, women are very rarely diagnosed or offered a neurodivergent diagnosis. That is kind of a part of what we're talking about here because women tend to mask much more than men and are much more likely to have a late in life diagnosis.
Mm.
I also hear stories of people being told that they are too capable, too competent to be neurodivergent. That somebody who's neurodivergent couldn't possibly be succeeding the way that you're succeeding, so
Yeah.
you must not have it, which is really problematic because while we don't have great numbers, if you take a glance around the internet, anywhere from about 10% to about 35% of all people are neurodivergent. I know I've already kind of quoted some different numbers today and in some of the promotional materials for this show, and that's because we don't have anything like good and locked in. And it's something I think that is important for other culture to be talking about more and to acknowledge more than we do.
Mm-hmm. And something that came up for me as you were talking about that is like, what is the standard for success in someone who is neurodivergent? Because, like, I had some clients, a couple, and one was on the spectrum. I think the other probably had ADHD. And the ADHD one was speaking of the one on the spectrum, saying, like, oh, he's getting really better at this. This thing doesn't seem to bother him as much anymore. He used to do this a lot and now he's getting a lot better. And I was like, or is he just masking? And he was right there next to her and he's like,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. Yep, I'm just masking. And I was like, yeah, so what is the standard for success? What is the standard for whatever we want to call recovery or coping with or embracing our neurodivergence? Is it coping to, like, is it being as productive the way that we're supposed to be productive and doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, or do we get to define for ourselves what success as a neurodivergent person means? And for me it means something very different than what I've been told. And I think that's what's really important within the psychological community, is to do patient first work, because we are so incredibly unique and we know what we need. And and it's important to center on what is distressing to us folks and what is not, and don't try to fix shit that's not broken, and let us just be ourselves and determine for ourselves what do we want to work on, what do we want to change, and why.
Yeah, and also to extend some understanding to one another as we work to be less ableist and more accepting. That we don't take it as a insult that our partner wasn't paying attention,
Mhm.
particularly in the context of like a tense argument or some really stressful situation, and instead recognize that their brain simply works differently than ours, not really even better or worse. Perhaps there are certain capacities that are different, but we can make space for that
Yeah.
rather than trying to cover it up and then judge ourselves and each other for being like mediocre at being neurotypical instead of being excellent at being ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, because I know that I've experienced so much more success in my relationships, in my job, in everything that I do, ever since I've embraced and leaned into my diagnosis, and I speak up for it. In fact, I feel even more comfortable on the show. Being on the show is stressful, not specifically this show, but being live, having people watch, that kind of thing is
Sure.
really stressful. But now I go into these things with a different attitude. I'm not here to try to perform and be somebody that's really well put together. My goal here is to have as much integrity as possible, like that the things that come out of my metaphorical heart come out of my mouth relatively unfiltered. And that is what I'm going to call success. Not, did I look this way? Did I talk that way? Did I did I build off of Christie's last statement in a relevant enough way?
Sure.
Like, am I derailing it? Am I, like all this shit? Like, I just, now I just want to be myself. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. I think it's the change I want to see in the world, and I want to. I think by doing that, I mean, I'm trying to encourage other people to, like, this is what this looks like, to, for me anyway, to
Sure.
be vulnerable, to be real, to be honest, and not have it be like, to feel bad about being honest about how your brain works. Like the little that I did explain about my brain just 5-10 minutes ago, if you rewind and go back, you're not going to see shame. You're not going to see me apologizing for it. I don't do that anymore. It's just facts. This is just kind of how this works, and just to embrace that, and just to relax into your brain.
Yeah. So broadly speaking, I'm hearing you say that we should just own our differences and our identity and be
Mhm.
transparent and sincere. But with that, are there any maybe particular strategies that you have tried, or any particular thought processes that have helped you in reducing or in ending some of these masking habits?
Yeah, and I was just looking over at my notes here. I'm not going to mask that I didn't take notes and didn't prepare this question ahead of time. But yeah, there's a lot of things that I've been doing since October that have helped me, and one of them is kind of changing my life philosophy. I think that I was unconsciously very wedded to the American um, narrative about how to be a human, and I already left Christianity. I know what it feels like to abandon a belief, and I'm doing it again. I am abandoning the belief that I need to be exceptional, that I need to make a certain amount of money, that I need to look a certain way. Um, and so, really changing what I think living is, like changing the philosophy of what it means to live and what are my values, that's been a big game changer. I didn't come to that naturally though. So like if you're not there, you're not there. Wait until you get there. But that was one thing that helped me. Also surrounding myself with really open-hearted people, whether they're neurodivergent or otherwise, people who understand the diversity of humanity, not just the beauty of neurodivergence, but the beauty in all of humanity, including the evangelical Christians that we are often complaining about. They are also being impacted by all these layers of society and messaging and religion that's been around here for a very long time. We're all struggling and we're all hurting, and I can relate to it. And so developing compassion and being around compassionate people, it's really hard to continue to hate yourself, and to
Mm-hmm.
beat yourself up when you surround yourself with those kinds of people and you raise your standards for what kind of hearts you want to hang out with. Um, I think another thing that's helped me, and again, I want to make the point that this isn't accessible for everyone. I realize that there's danger, there's risk in all of this, but this is just assuming that these are accessible things. I just want to put that disclaimer
Fair.
in there. But for me, another thing that has helped is talking about it all the time. Like not
Sure.
not
Yeah.
overwhelming people, but just like in conversation. Just if it's relevant, just be like, oh hey, could if y- my friend wants to hang out with me on Saturday morning because I walked past her house and she's like, hey, let's hang out on Saturday morning. I'm like, great. I'm on a walk right now. I'm not going to write this down. I've got ADHD. Would you mind being accountable for texting me to remind me that we talked about this so I can get it on my calendar? And she's like, totes my goats. And I'm like, sweet. And so like it's normalizing that. It's not being like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Could you just like, oh, like, could you
Yeah.
meh? Like,
Or
no,
saying that you'll remember
yeah,
and then having like a 25-50% chance of forgetting, and then being so angry and upset with yourself and beating yourself up so that next time a situation like this comes up, you're so ashamed that you
yeah,
can't even think about speaking up,
yeah.
and you beat yourself up even more when it happens again. And it, I'm glad that you're breaking that cycle.
Oh my God, I'm glad I am too. And I didn't think that life could get better, and it did. And I think another thing that I think the one of the two big things that really helped, I hired an ADHD coach.
Mm,
There is such a thing, and her name is Tracy Winters, and she's amazing. And there is nothing like talking to someone who understands your brain, like the kind of validation that I've been dying for. It's amazing. And like, there's, again, I'm narrowing in on ADHD, but I'm sure there's analogous things for all other forms of neurodiversity as well. But there's a group called ADD.org, and you can sign up for a membership for like $50 a year. And you can go to all these online groups and stuff. And there's like even an ADHD group for entrepreneurs, because we are incredibly creative people. And it's just, I've showed up in those groups and I just like, like they're all speaking my language. Oh my God. And you feel like, oh my God, I didn't even know I had a first language. It feels like you've been speaking in the second language your whole life, and that you forgot that you had a first language. And then so reconnecting with this part of myself and connecting with people who relate to it makes me feel like, oh, I do belong. I am a human being. And
Neurodiversity is my mother tongue. Yeah,
yes.
I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that was I mean, boundary setting also is really important, because with ADHD, at least, there's a lot of codependency that can come from that due to like insecure attachment styles. So so learning about how to communicate about your boundaries is really helpful, but to be able to communicate about your boundaries, you really kind of have to connect to yourself. And so there's a lot of self connection stuff that needs to be done. And that's hard, especially for us that maybe have come out of Christianity and been experienced spiritual abuse. It can be a scary place to go back into, because
that type of introspection and spiritual connection with the self. Yeah.
Yeah, especially as like, where are you going to find a community that's going to help you facilitate that without them bringing their woo into it and then thus triggering you? And so I'm concerned about our community. When I say our, I mean people recovering from spiritual abuse in Christianity. I'm concerned about us, because I have determined, at least for me, that my healing comes from connecting to myself, but I've been avoiding it or afraid of it because I've put a barrier up around that center part of myself because of all of this stuff, man. And like, and now, so
Which
yeah,
is fair to do, you know. I'm
is.
glad that you're pushing through it, but let's also acknowledge the validity of that choice. So long as the folks who are listening to my voice right now are thinking intentionally about this as a choice rather than a reaction.
Right. And I think, I'm curious to see what you think about this, Christy, but I also, in our over pathologizing mental illness society, I want to challenge at least maybe some of the negativity associated with the word masking, as if like, oh, I'm masking, like, and that's
like you
bad.
have to fix it. Yeah.
And they say like it's something to fix, but humans aren't broken. And so when I look back at my life and I think about everything that's led me up to here, I don't feel bad about masking. I feel like, holy shit, my brain is so smart, because it went through all of this abuse and it was just like, we're just going to shut this down. We're just going to turn it off. And if you're miserable for 2 decades, it's fine. Just keep trucking along, you know? So like, I see it now, like, for the beauty that it was. Yes, it all hurt and stuff, but I don't know, like, there's something incredibly beautiful about that. And I hope that's not hard for some people to, so I'll only speak for myself, that just reflecting back, I'm incredibly grateful and in awe of my human body and of my consciousness to be able to do these things behind the scenes, to block me from seeing me. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, it's about appropriateness. I think that's the only thing to be said about it. Like, there's nothing wrong with having a customer service voice or putting a little bit of a lacquer or a nice veneer on the way that you express yourself. But we want to be aware of that thing, because nobody wants to be married to a car salesman. Like, they want to see the sincere you in that type of environment. And so just being mindful and intentional and self-aware about these things, which, as we've pointed out, can be incredibly challenging. So I hope that there are folks who are listening to this who are not like just throwing a diagnostic label on themselves and having themselves a pity party, but that are rather realizing that this is way more common than we realize, that this may explain some of the friction in your life, And by becoming aware of that fact, you might be a little bit more empowered to do something to benefit yourself.
Mhm.
None of us are broken. None of these are things that need to be fixed. But a little bit of self awareness can go a long way towards making life more pleasurable to live.
Yeah, one other thing that turns me on is the show Moon Knight, the new
Mm,
Marvel show that's
sure.
come out. I will not give any
I
spoilers.
was about to say I did not catch last night's episode. Let's
I
be mindful.
I didn't either. I didn't either. So all I'll say is that something that I've gotten from that show is that, or rather, an experience of my own that it has validated at a corporate like media Marvel level, is that sometimes all you have to do is just witness it.
Yeah,
Just
I think
by
that's a good,
looking at it, because I think
excellent
for a
point.
long time, I felt like I had to fix it. I had to make a plan, a strategy. I'm a project to be fixed, and I'm slowly learning that just by looking at it in the eyes and saying, "This is what this is,"
Mhm.
it can calm down. The distress can reduce, just by witnessing. It's just crazy. All this like American like, "Arr, like I'm gonna get zen," like it's just letting go and being soft and gentle and just witnessing and holding space for yourself to be sad and have whatever feelings you need to have about that which you are.
Mhm. Well, fair to say.